I do have it, although I looked back and I couldn't find Lebanon.
I think I may have it.
The one I have is it says Hanover.
What is it?
Hanover.
Hanover, yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
that's
I
what it
was.
was. All right, maybe we can share that with you. You might find it helpful. Go ahead. Yes. Yeah, okay. We'll get you copies of that.
Yeah, I can share with that.
All right. Proceed.
Sure. Good evening, and I'm here to talk about the first quarter of the fiscal year. And just to follow up on that meeting before I get into this, I think it's an excellent idea to do it in August after we've completed the fiscal year and having the departments come in and say where they felt they were at with their budget that they had just previously finished up, and then where they're looking forward to the new budget cycle starting in September. So I think August is the right time to have that stakeholders meeting that you're referring to. But on the quarterly financials, first quarter of the 2011-2012 budget, we have an operating budget of $14 million, and we have expended just under $4 million, which is 28%, very consistent with the previous two budget years at this time. Our general fund revenues, we had budgeted 4.5 million in revenues, and we have collected about 900,000, which is a little bit more than what we had seen in the previous 2 years. And I'll speak to what is driving those up, but it's mostly ambulance revenues, just to kind of throw it out there. On page 2 is a list of where we're at on September 30th with each of the departments. And the monthly statements that you all receive goes into detail about the individual lines, but administration is at 43% spent, and that's pretty typical because the larger workers' compensation and property liability is paid for the most part in full at the beginning of the fiscal year. And there are a few adjustments that come through when we add or delete equipment or, you know, that sort of things. But for the most part, it's expended in the first quarter. Also, the legal fees are trending a little high due to litigation costs. Again, we're seeing some reevaluation, assessing issues that are still in place that will be hopefully come to some resolution come February. The assessing department is running a little bit over target, and that's mainly due, again, to those couple of cases that they're working on for the reevaluation, which happened in 2008, and they're just getting resolved, should I say. Other than that, most of the other departments are trending right where they should be. You see that the recycling department is under budget, and that's due to the tipping fees. Most times what happens is we're actually a month behind in our expenses because what is paid, or what is purchased in July, we don't get billed until the next month, so August. So that's why these are a little bit down on there. And family services doing pretty well too. Moving over, under administration, if you compare it to the last 3 years, again, you see that we're at 44% spent of the budget. And, you know, the annual budget for the 2011-12 year is lower. It's at the lowest rate in the last 3 years. And the reasons that we're at 40% is, like I said earlier, it's due to the workers' comp, property liability, and the legal lines being spent. Fire rescue is trending just about where it's been for the last 3 years. There's no big surprises in there. We did see the change in the retirement rate on the employer share, and that's going to put a strain on the budget in the amount of $53,000. We do expect that both police and fire will have retirement issues for this budget year, the challenges that they'll be facing. And the offset to that is that all the other departments, the group one of general employees, really sees a savings about 50,000. So generally speaking, the retirement as a whole for the community, police, fire, and general, we should be looking at trying to find about 67,000 in the budget. We did get the health insurance rates, although they're not reflected in this quarter, because we just got the information earlier this week or late last week. And what we saw was that if we stayed on the current plan that the employees have the blue choice with the prescription, the dollar prescription mail-in, we would have seen a 3.5% increase in that rate. But due to the employees changing, we're actually seeing a reduction in the health insurance rate of 1.6%. So there was a savings. That change provided a 5% savings. Yes?
I thought that we didn't change our insurance until January 1.
Right, so what I'm saying is, and you're right, it's not going to be in effect until January 1st, but that means that 6 months of that cost will be in this budget. So from January to June, we should see a savings of 1.6% in our.
But if it's increased by 3.5, we would only see a reduction. If it's a 3.5% increase for 6 months,
So,
and then a 1.6 reduction for 6 months,
Yeah.
doesn't that wash out to like
no,
a
so
2% increase?
let me just say it again, because I wasn't
Please.
clear.
I'm sorry.
If we had stayed on the current prescription plan, the plan that we have in place right now, the town would have seen a 3.5% increase.
For 12 months.
Right, for the
Now it's only
2012 calendar year. This budget that we're currently in is only 6 months, the January through June. And due to the change that we actually made with the prescription plan, the actual rate went down 1.6%. So there is a 5% difference between what it would have been January and what we will see in January.
I see, so you're adding them together.
Yeah, the difference between a positive
Correct.
3.5 and a negative, right? So that savings for all the employees would be about 80,000 in this year's budget. So when we were talking about New Hampshire retirement and looking for the 67, well, the offset is in the savings on the health insurance. With the one caution that if the fire doesn't change, then we would only see a 50% savings, because there's a little bit of an issue with the fire and whether or not that will actually go through. So the New Hampshire retirement increases should be saved with the decrease of the savings that we found in the change in the prescription for this current year.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I was kind of saying. And then the fire, so we talked about the New Hampshire retirement, and we talked about a little bit on the health savings side of it. In the ambulance revenue, that division, as you know, started a year and a half ago, and they have a budget, an operating budget of 74,000, and they've spent 20,000 of that, so it's about 27. It is anticipated that at town meeting, the community voted to establish a separate account for the ambulance to be self-funding. And the question came up then, and the chief and I have talked about it a couple of times, when do we move into that account and when do we stop using the operating budget? And we're anticipating that changeover will be in January. And the real the trigger for the change is, in this budget we had said that we were going to collect 150,000 of ambulance revenue. And once we do that, so that there's no impact, negative impact to this operating budget, then we'll transfer that ambulance fund over. So we expect that in January.
Sure.
Fill it up.
Hey, just brief,
Yeah.
just clarity on that.
Yeah.
Okay? We always talk in terms of revenue,
Mhm.
but then there's cost associated to it. So I guess the question is in comparison to revenue versus cost, I mean, they're saying that they'll be able to be self-sufficient in regards to the ambulance division, and they've isolated all the expense for that.
Well, so it used to be that the town paid 70,000+ to Tri-Town to run the ambulance service. And the chief had said to the council that if the council gave the fire department the 70,000+, that he could run it in-house and he would use that 70,000 for overtime costs. So everybody said, okay, go for that. And he's been able to manage that. But really what he's doing is, an ambulance call goes out, if he has appropriate staff, he sends the ambulance out and it comes back in, no time's charged to the ambulance account. If he sends the ambulance out and his staff goes down below minimum staffing and he has to call somebody in to fill that position because the ambulance is out, that's the time that he's charging to that overtime. So when you say it's fully funded in the sense that no additional manpower, the additional manpower it takes to run the ambulance service is being captured and paid out of that account. But if you really took the staff that was always there, like no new manpower, their time is being reallocated. Some of it is going towards that ambulance and some of it is, their fire
So
duties.
to encapsulate that, what you're saying is we're always going to pay that 70,000
Sounds like
in perpetuity, right? We're never going to be able to
cut the cord.
cut the cord, right?
Right, well, you're always gonna pay something when the staffing goes below the minimum
Right.
requirement.
Sorry, Chair, could I follow up on it? And because the warrant basically said that all the revenue from that would be isolated in order to cover, and I don't have it on the top of my mind, but I thought it was operational costs plus capital equipment plus, right? But in that it was broad enough to say that it could actually be used for the fire department as well, right? Not just the,
No, it was
The ambulance?
only ambulance
okay,
services.
so only ambulance services.
Right,
So I guess the question is that, does he see an opportunity in the future in which that 70,000 would be, that it would be a self-sufficient entity?
so the 70,000 in the future, we're thinking it'll start in January, will get funded out of that ambulance revenue, so it won't be funded out of tax dollars.
So we will see a $70,000 decrease in his budget?
Yes.
Okay, all right, well.
For
that's-
next year,
For
you would
next year,
see
okay.
the ambulance division in his budget go down to 0. And
Okay.
we anticipate that he won't have expended the 70,000 this year in this current budget. Some will have been expended, but it won't be the full 70, so he'll have a little savings this year.
I think that's the answer that Councilor Lozano.
Yeah, I.
That's where you're trying to go.
Well, I got confused, because I had said, we're gonna pay that 70,000 in perpetuity. But what you're saying is that we should see a $70,000 reduction because the revenues generated from the ambulance service should make it self-sufficient.
Right.
And allow them some extra in regards to keep equipment and such.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Right.
Christine, I thought at the deliberative session, the warrant article got changed a little bit to where he had to bring any request to move that money to the council.